Hotel, brothers and sisters. Do I have the permission of the elders in the house to continue? Mojibah to the ancestors. We hope that they will guide and inspire what we say and do here this evening, and that they will be pleased with the outcome of our deliberations this evening. Let me just say a few things. Some of you know me, know I'm fairly long-winded, but I'm going to keep this straight to my task that has been set before me this evening to moderate our panel. It's very difficult for me to come to New York City without thinking of my dear friend and brother, the late Brother Amos Wilson. Brother Amos was a very special person to me. I often tell people that among those of us who are called psychologists, I think that outside of my mentor, Brother Bobby Wright, I think Amos was the next closest thing to Bobby that I ever encountered as a psychologist. And we became very close. He was a very powerful African spirit, as some of you know, since he was local. And we miss him dearly in this struggle, and he will forever be an inspiration to all of us. Can we give just a moment of silence in remembrance of this great African warrior, Brother Amos? Madasi. I have the distinct honor and pleasure of moderating this evening's session. We have two stalwarts in the ASCAC movement who will be speaking with us this evening. Two of our panelists who are listed will not be with us. Brother James Turner and Brother Tony Martin. I understand that they won't be with us this evening. But we still have, what we say, a chief and a general left, as was indicated, who can certainly provide us with the intellectual nourishment and inspiration that we are looking for this evening in this panel. Our theme is insightful history, or the word, insightful history, igniting the future for the African curriculum. Our first panelist will be a sister that I've known for quite some time in this movement. She has a very distinguished history in this movement, having carried the banner of leadership in a variety of African-centered organizations and activities over the period of time that I have known her and prior to that time. She has informed me that she is a member of the retirement set, retiring from, the white folks institution. That's all that really means. We don't retire from the struggle, but retiring from the harassment of the Europeans, the Urugu harassment, I guess we'll call that. And so we are very pleased that she's now able to devote 130% of her energies exclusively to the liberation of African people without the Urugu harassment rider accompanying that. Sister Charsee McIntyre is Professor Emeritus, retired Professor Emeritus from Old Westboro State University, New York. She's an activist, she's a mother, she's a queen warrior for our people, and it is a great honor and pleasure to bring her to you this evening to speak on our panel. The first speaker, Sister McIntyre.
Does that impress you? Before I start, and before I get permission, do I have permission, Mom? Okay. But before I start, I want to take this moment to remind everybody about Professor Ed Scobie. Yes. In this hall, at this place, his spirit is always with us. So we have to do another moment. Okay? Okay. Scobie was important in my life because he was the first critic of any so-called academic paper I ever did. And the first paper I did was on 3 worldviews. It was only 2 worlds at that time. It was just African and European. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that to commemorate his spirit. But let me start over. Hotel. Kabaragani. Assalamu alaikum. Shalom, peace, and namaste. Namaste, the God in me sees and honors the God in you. Namaste. So if there's any question about the color of the Son of God, just look in the mirror. And even if the Son of God thinks he was white, his mother was black. Did you hear that, Joy Hardiman? The word and womb. I was surprised, Dr. Jeffries created this panel. He didn't tell me anything that I was supposed to talk about, not that anybody ever does. But I want to talk, we have heard so much good stuff today. I don't know what they're going to do tomorrow, do you? I mean, this day has been so rich. Jake Carruthers, I think, is, we love Dr. Ben, we love Dr. Clark, we love Chancellor Williams and stuff, but let's not forget the reigning scholars that we have in our midst, and among them, one among peers is Jake Carruthers. And that's not to take anything away from Asa Hilliard, because everybody knows Asa Hilliard. People know Asa everywhere, but Jake Carruthers is a powerhouse. And he's a powerhouse because he's doing what and I'm very subjective because I don't know what Europeans mean about objective scholarship and stuff, because as an African Native American woman and on Thursdays, but, as a non-white male, I can't afford to be anything but subjective, because if I don't look at the world from my subjective personality and understanding and consciousness, I'm not going to see the world. I'm going to see everybody else's world. So what I want to kind of do today is take you on a 50,000 year ago trip. See, because if you want to be African-centered, and we have all these approaches on how to reach your consciousness and stuff, but if you want to deal with African-centeredness, you've got to begin with Africans. You've got to begin with Africa. Now, I'm an African Native American. That bothers a lot of people because they want me to be African. But my husband's African, Jamaican, Caribbean, or West Indian, whatever, comes up. My father was African Canadian. Everybody's African Ghanaian, African Nigerian, African Brazilian. Only African Americans are just African. Now, that's not a criticism. That may be a very powerful position because we represent the diaspora and we work together. But it requires some insights. It requires us to move consciously to a level where when we think about Africa. Now, most of you think that the indigenous people in this hemisphere, or most of you have been taught that the indigenous people in this hemisphere came over the ice bridge in the Bering Strait. Ain't no black people been running all through Asia and come running across no ice bridge and come running down here from Vancouver down to Tierra del Fuego in South America, peopling this continent. Do you believe that? Do you really believe that? I mean, I know Diop says it, Diop says it, Sheikh Anta Diop says it, I know Ivan Van Sertima says it, I know all of the scholars say it, but I am telling you, in my African Native American soul, I know ain't no little black people went running over no ice bridge to populate this hemisphere. Guess where the hypothesis came from? It came from Thomas Jefferson popularized the idea. At the time, he was stealing the land in the Louisiana Purchase. It came at a time when they wanted you to think everybody in this hemisphere was also an immigrant, so they were just later immigrants, so then they, therefore, would be entitled to the land. Are you following me? Come on, most of you have Native American indigenous blood. But if everybody was started in Africa 40, 50, 100, 200,000 years ago, we weren't afraid of the ocean. Europeans are afraid of the ocean. They got the Loch Lomond monster, they're afraid of the sea. The Irish nearly starved to death because they didn't know how to fish. Dumb suckers. The so-called pilgrims in Plymouth, if it weren't for Massasoit and Samoset and Squancho, would have died. And you all wouldn't be around here celebrating the first harvest, which you had mistakenly called Thanksgiving. And those dishonest suckers wrote back to England and said the natives are now paying us tribute after they got through saving these poor suckers from starving to death who had just gotten off of a boat that they stayed on for an entire year because they didn't know what to do on the land until the Native Americans said, this is how you plant corn. This is how you toil the soil. This is how you fish, you dumb suckers. This is real. This is real. If you want to be African, you have to be African. You have to think, what would the world be like if there were I think this all the time. It won't be difficult once you get in the habit. What would the world be like if there were no white people? Hey, don't laugh at me. There was a time. There was a time when there were no white people. 1492 is an afterthought. It's not even a semicolon in history. It's not even a dash, like an aside. Oh, by the way, 1492, we have documented evidence of human culture, civilization, whatever you want to call it, going back 120,000 years in this hemisphere. American Genesis. 120,000 years old. Here's Tony Martin. So, okay? Well, even if you don't want to read it, one of the great chapters in this book is the sinking of the Bering Strait. The sinking. Now, what am I trying to get across to you? I'm trying to get across to you, I don't know whether what I'm telling you is true or even tenable, that Africans, Australoids, Negroids, Pygmoids, whatever those terms are, inhabited this hemisphere 50,000 years ago. 50,000 years ago means that the European, the Caucasoid, was still a Neanderthal. So we know he ain't got on no boat and came over here, right? But if there were Australoids and Negroids and Pygmoids over here, you know, little black men and brown men with nappy hair and thick noses and lips and big butts and long arms and long legs. Let me take you on the trip. You're telling me that they went all the way through Asia, they became Mongoloids or leucoderms, and then they mixed with the African, and they became Mongoloids, and then they came over the Bering Strait, and then they came down to the equatorial belt, and then when they got in the equatorial belt, they changed back into little black men. You picked up some melanin on the trip and through the ice. Because when the so-called Europeans got here, the people in the equatorial belt were all little black men in the Fiji Islands, in the Hawaiian Islands. You go there today, all around the equatorial belt, everybody has an African base. And I suggest to you that they got on a raft, got on a current, and if you look at Van Sertima's work or Joseph Harris' work or anybody's work, you will see that you can get on the currents and ride around the oceans if you're not looking for monsters. Now, my father's people in Nova Scotia on one side are the Micmacs up there by Chittagong Bay, near the Inuits, which some people call Eskimos, but Eskimos are someplace else. But what is the fundamental thing about Native American ship-going crafts? They don't sink. You sink, but they don't sink. They take trees, and Africans do too, and they take trees and they carve them out and they put them on the water, and those will hit, and they are ocean-bearing crafts. Europeans make boats with holes in them. Okay? All I'm saying is this. You see this book? It's called Forbidden Archaeology. Forbidden Archaeology. Forbidden. It's written by white people. And in it is a compilation of everything the people found that the standard group of so-called intellectuals have rejected. That's what it is. If you come up with an idea that does not support the prevailing accepted interpretation of the world, then it goes in this book. It doesn't go, and you have to understand when you do archaeology, okay, you have to disrupt the area that you got it out of. There is no documentation of anything in the Bering Strait. Not unless you can bury through tons of ice, you know, and find it, you know it's not there. They have no proof. We as African scholars are up against the lies of Europeans. And we don't need to spend our time arguing with them. Right? We need to go inside our head and say, there was a time when there were no Europeans in the world. What was the world like? What is the diaspora? What are the migrational patterns of the world? How did all these black people get in India, what we call India? How did all these black people get in Australia? How did all these black people get here in this hemisphere? And how long have they been here? And don't use 1492 or even the 11th century. And then when they got here, and I really get upset about this. And they say, you came before Columbus. Well, what did you find when you got here? Me. We were here. And how did we get here? Because we left the origins of humanity and we migrated all over the world. And we need to take credit for that. And we need to look at the common cultural bearings of the people. Native American culture is so similar to African culture. Similar. Even the blues, even the drumming, even the dancing, even the pyramids, even the thought, even the concept of direction. You know, not just north, east, south, and west, but each direction means something. The east is the beginning, the south is the sun, and they all have colors, and the west is this is Native American. And then you have to be centered. Things mean something. Jake Carruthers told us about the sacredness of the womb of the word. I'm into the sacredness of the womb. But it's the same. And we need to understand it. You know how Native Americans say, pale face speak with forked tongue? Isn't that a statement of saying, be careful with the way you speak? Think about the way you speak. Think about the way you hear the drums here, you hear the African drum. They're giving you the rhythm of the mother, the rhythm of the heart, the rhythm of the pulsation of the world. Native American drumming is boring as hell. Why? Because they are trying to recreate the atmosphere of the universe. They're trying to blend in. They're trying to deal with sound. Ah, eh, e, o, u. Each one means something. Each one represents a cardinal virtue and value that you are throwing out into the universe. They are not sterile like Europeans. They don't have what you call rhetoric and logic. They speak in metaphor. My grandmother used to say, give with an eye of a needle to get back with an eye of a needle. I was about 8 years old. I said, well, damn, I can barely spread a needle. You know, Mary, how dumb we are. But that's not the same thing as what goes around comes around. If you give a little bit, you give a little bit. You know, because you are supposed to learn from the wisdom, but in your learning, as Jake Carruthers said this morning, you got to listen. But even more important, after you listen, you got to think. You know, what you heard, what does that mean? What are these old folks telling us? And what do they expect us to understand after we hear the message? And then, what are we supposed to do? We, not I, not me, but we. What are we supposed to do after we learn and hear the message? That's all basic to Africans and Native Americans. Europeans are an anathema in the arena of humanity. right? They are the only group of people, the ones who think, the Yorugians, who think that they can fight nature. Everybody has to deal with nature because we are part of nature. But they actually believe they can get a phone booth, a red and blue uniform, jump out there and stop a hurricane. They tell you dumb stuff like Easter bunnies lay eggs and reindeer fly and big fat white men in red outfits come down chimneys in projects that don't even have heat. They tell you lies in a sentence. Columbus discovered America and the natives were friendly. In the same sentence. And you sit there, and if I have any message to tell you today, it's that we have to take our African insight, our African paranoia. We have to read whatever these caucasoids wrote. And we have to say, I wonder what's wrong with that. Because they are dedicated to the lie. And our struggle is to find the truth. And we cannot use them. We have to use them to some degree, but we can't use them as the paradigm, as the route to the truth. They can only show us where not to go. And like Martin Luther King said, this is a burning house. These people are alienated. These people, their whole projection is to get into space. And I think we ought to send them there. Okay.
Of Deep Beginning, Charles Finch's new book. In fact, I have a copy of it right here. And when you read what it is that we already knew there, and when you look at this is his new book, Star of Deep Beginning, and when you look at the African independent education tradition, I mean, it'd be hard to find another school like Morehouse College. As far as academic achievement is concerned, it'd be hard to find something that can outdo Spelman. They regularly rank up there with Harvard and Yale and stuff like that. It'd be hard to look at a school like Tougaloo College, which has open admissions and produces 40% of the black lawyers in Mississippi. It'd be hard to argue with that. It'd be hard to argue with Shabazz's outstanding work in producing PhD mathematicians in America, more than anybody else in the world ever done. We know how to do that stuff. We also knew how to socialize our children. So we didn't have that problem. Now people got us thinking that we don't know how to solve the problem. And so we're sitting down at other people's feet asking questions like, how do I educate the at-risk child? Africans sitting down asking that question. I said, who is the at-risk child? See, somebody stopped them from knowing who they were. Didn't say, how did you educate the African child? How do you educate the at-risk child? That's just one of the strategies to separate Africans from the identity that they are. And once you do that, everything is off. Everything is vulnerable. The fifth message is that we've been off our path for 40 years. Off our path. That we started out where Charles Hamilton found us, asking for legitimacy, and then we switched our agenda to efficiency. And we stopped asking the question about, are the schools legitimate? Are they really telling us the truth? Are they really educating us in our own interest? We stopped asking those questions. I don't mean everybody. Obviously, folk in here have been asking those questions all along. And then I have a sixth message that in spite of all the problems, that we have the power, even now, with no money to do anything that we want to do. Anything that consciousness dictates we can do. That's the beauty of this. Y'all don't know. If you haven't tried to write a book, I mean, I can, if I want to talk nonsense, I can get any of my books published anywhere I want to get them published. No problem. But the minute you say something serious, suddenly there's no market for that. You know? That's why it's necessary. There's no market for this book in the main publishers. They don't want that book. That's why we have to publish the book. But guess what? Just because there was no market, just because we didn't have a publisher, didn't mean that we could outdo all the publishers and all the markets with our book. So we produced it because we wanted to produce it. We produced it out of nothing. It's like ASCAC. You would think for everything that we've been doing, not just this book, but all the position papers, all the conferences, all the workshops, all the things, you would think that ASCAC had millions of dollars. And when you go to the office, you would think it would be at least as large as City College. It's about as big. Where the office? It's in the basement. Yeah, you're in Nzinga's basement. That's where you are. We don't have any money. We don't have any budget. All we got is power. You understand that? That power comes because we're independent and because we're unified. And so there's a chapter that says purposeful transformation, which outlines how we can even take the existing raggedy system and make it work. You know, we can take public schools, and if we put the right power on them, we can make them do some of the things that we want them to do. The one thing they can't do is socialize our children for us because they're public. And the only people that can socialize an African are independent Africans. That means old wise people have to be in charge of the process. They cannot be asking Nike or the governor for permission to organize the system that we want. You can't even take the energy to get into that argument. If you start taking money for this piece, that's why people start talking about rites of passage, then they go into some corporation to fund it. I know it's easier. But the corporation will not fund the rites of passage. They can't do it. See? So we have to do that ourselves. I would rather have a poor, right socialization process than a rich, wrong one. The last chapter in Saba is a chapter that deals with homework. And so it was just my way of trying to identify some of the kinds of reading that we have to do. There's certain reading that you got to do if you're doing Saba, if you're doing African deep thought. There's certain books you cannot be an African if you haven't read Marimba Ani's book, Urugu. You cannot be an African if you haven't read J. Carruthers' Medu Neter. This is serious stuff. If you haven't read Ayikwe Armaz, 2000 Seasons, and especially Osiris Rising. You see? There's certain things that will shape the images, that will chart the direction, that will keep us on course, that we have to read. That doesn't mean you don't read anything else. Read everything else. You know, people accuse us of being narrow in our focus. Black folk read everybody's literature. Most of the people I know, Runoko Rashidi is all over the world. Reading anything he can get his hands on. And they're mad about that. And he starts coming back with the information they didn't want him to have. And so you start raising all kind of questions. You say, you mean white supremacy is a global system, not just local? And they're keeping information out about every African anywhere? And here you keep digging it up. You're not supposed to do it. So it seems to me that the awakened African mind, what do we mean by that? You say reawakening of the African mind. The one thing we mean is that the mind is still there. It's not gone anywhere. It's just been anesthetized, been put to sleep. You know, after so long of being disconnected, you know, you dry up and you go to sleep. You roll up into this little corner. All it takes is somebody to come along with a little water, a little fertilizer. The next thing you know, that sleeping mind begins to wake up. You've seen it, haven't you? You've seen people have a certain experience and be transformed in front of your eyes. People you thought were lost forever. It was there all the time. That African mind is there. And so it just needs to be awake instead of sleep, because asleep you can't do anything. So it means that we have to, first, the African mind that's awake has a whole lot of questions. The awake African mind questions everything and anybody. I don't care who they are, including Africans. You got to question everybody, right, Mario? Anybody. You got to question all the Babas. No Baba is beyond question. All the founders of ASCAC, they got to be questioned. I'm talking about an awake mind now. Because see, there's a lot of people taking our tradition, especially Kemet. As soon as they get a few words of meta nature and a couple of pieces of cloth that look like the old people, then the next thing you know, they turn it into a pimping thing. And all of a sudden you got something that ain't what it's supposed to be. See, that's got to be questioned. You got to be questioning everything. And when somebody tells you you can't ask questions, you're in the wrong room. You're in the wrong room. Somebody asked me and said, well, do you have to be in the ASCAC religion to come to ASCAC meetings? I mean, I couldn't believe it. I said, you obviously don't know ASCAC. We're fussing and fighting with each other all the time. We just have this umbrella of love that allows us to hang together even when we disagree with each other. So there is no religion in ASCAC. See? Not in the sense that we understand. Some of us are committed, whatever you think your religion is, to that great organizing African principle you find all over the continent, Ma'at. And if you're against that, then I question your religion. So the questioning, that's what I mean by an African mind. Then there are certain habits that an African mind has. We have to be able to answer certain questions habitually. Booker T. Washington Coleman is the one, I'm paraphrasing and modifying his question list. But it hit me one day when he said it. It was awesome, the effect that it had on me for him to say it at that time just the way he said it. He said certain questions that any human being is supposed to be able to answer. And these are the questions that our enemies don't want us to answer. He says, who am I? Where did I come from? How in the world did I get here? You know, he said, who in the world am I? Where in the world did I come from? How in the world did I get here? He's got those questions. So I extended it a little bit, and I acknowledge my debt to him for this. But let me just say, I'd like to have us frame it this way. And if we had a habit of trying to answer these questions, because you can't answer them forever, because we keep getting new information. So you ask the question, who are we? That question I don't want you to answer. They say, we'll tell you, Hefney, who you are. You are a white man. That's what you are. And if you don't shut up, you will lose your job. We will tell you who you are. So we have to be able to answer, who are we? Where did we come from? There are people who don't want you to know that. That's why they stopped history at slavery. I went to a school, and you did too in most cases, where you didn't have a history before. You don't get mentioned in the curriculum until before slavery. Well, that means they can't be teaching the truth. That means the curriculum can't be true. It can't be legitimate, as Hamilton said. So where did we come from? And don't tell me Philly. How in the world did we get here? See? They don't want us to answer those questions. When I start laying out, that's why I started working with longitudinal timeline, plotting African life episodes on a timeline, laying them out in front of you. One brother out of Baltimore, Asa Owusu, got this 12-foot time chart that started 250,000 years ago. And while that's a devastating piece of information for some people. They can't handle it because they don't have a timeline like that. We're the only ones got that one. But it's not to dominate anybody with our timeline. It's to clarify us with our timeline. That's why we need it. So where in the world did I come from? How did I get here? Why did I get here? That's the geopolitical question, isn't it? Why in the world did I get here? There's answers to these questions, wherever here is. If here is Belize, if here Baba Rashidi is Indian with the Dravidian, how and why did we get here? Why? Where are we going? People don't want us to ask this question. I think it's a legitimate question if you exist. If you don't exist, no point in answering the question. If you're a hitchhiker, if you are a spectator at somebody else's ball game, you don't need to ask these questions. But if I have a destiny, a destination, see, what does it mean in the 1990s to be a person or people in the world with no destination? What does that mean? There's something sick about that. There's something crippled about that. There's something disabled about that. So it seems to me that we have to work on that problem. We have to provide answers. That's what I mean by the awakened mind. The sleep mind doesn't need to ask that question. The sleep mind says, I wonder who's going to be president. I wonder, will Clinton do better than Bush? No. Both of them got their own agenda. We think we got to choose. I have to choose nothing. Choose destiny. And then you make up your decision who's going to do something for you minute by minute, because it changes. Their agenda changes. One minute he's dumping on Jesse Jackson in order to develop a Southern strategy. Next minute he's dumping on Sister Soldier. Then after the election, embracing Vernon Jordan, embracing everybody else. Well, what is it? Which is it? Which one? Well, I shouldn't have to answer that question. How did it happen? How did people get us where we are and then take our minds and put them on hold, put them in neutral, anesthetize them? There's an answer to that question. I was going to show you some overheads, but it's going to take a little while, so I won't do that. I'll just tell you that there is a strategy for putting minds to sleep. Hide the information. That will put a mind to sleep. That means a curriculum in which you're not in it will put a mind to sleep. Do not allow people to feel connected to each other. That means take their name so they can't have a connection. Take their culture